Hi, and thanks for joining us. I'm Amber Strong. Newsy is proud to bring you our focus on mental health, covering the reality in a way it has never been covered before, and it comes at a critical time. The CDC reports 1 in 4 Americans between the ages of 18 and 44 received mental health treatment last year. That's up nearly 20% from before the pandemic. This hour, we will bring you stories of some of these Americans. These are people we've met from all walks of life, so many races, ages, genders from different backgrounds in communities big and small across our country, all facing similar challenges, all with stories to tell about how they've overcome and broken through their darkest days. These are messages of struggle, but also of hope. We begin this hour with Sergio Alfaro, a veteran of the Iraq War who lives with PTSD.
My name is Sergio Alfaro. I am 39 years old. I'm a veteran. I served as an Army medic. I was with the 116th Mechanized Infantry, Ramadi, Iraq, from 2003 to 2004. There's faces that I'll never forget. It's something that I see time and time again in my head, regardless of whatever it is I'm doing. It feels like there's always a face that sits there in my mind, in the background, kind of looking at me, watching me. This face is of an Iraqi policeman. He was somebody who was shot through the abdomen. He was just caught in between a firefight in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's just unfortunate that he was injured by that 50 caliber bullet. And this is no small bullet. He suffered an evisceration. Because of that, he died very painfully. He died shouting and screaming. And etched on his face was the absolute look of horror and terror and pain that I've ever had to see anybody ever had to live with. It's not anything I'm ever going to be able to escape from. And it's the thing that I have to work towards being able to accept every day. I remember when I left Iraq, it was a sense of disbelief that, this wasn't real. When I came back home, I remember there was this feeling of, I got a second lease on life. I have to admit, it took me a while to realize that there was something wrong with me, and I didn't want to see it at first. I was having nights where I would wake up screaming, clutching at my bed sheets, either drenched in sweat and thinking that we got hit by another mortar, because I just heard the explosion and kind of straining my ears because of what I had practiced over and over and over and over again of, am I okay? Is everyone else okay? Is anyone shouting medic and trying to strain into the darkness to see if and hear if anybody was actually calling out for me and if in need of help? And I'd have these moments too of disconnection of myself, where I would enter into this kind of zombie mode, and I would be a raging storm on the inside, full of emotion of either anxiety or fear or of anger. I remember one day I was just so out of it that I would see that dead Iraqi policeman's face on other people's faces. And I couldn't even look people in the face because I just would see his face on their faces, or it got so bad that I would see their face warped into that dead Iraqi man's police face. And I didn't want to see anybody's face like that, in such pain and terror. And I got scared. It just seemed never ending, like it was just something that was just flowing through me and filling up every nook and cranny of my being and was wanting to even sweep me away with it. At that moment, I felt like I was crazy, that I was beyond hope, beyond saving. So when my wife told me, hey, I don't know how much longer I could do this, well, I'll tell you what, my initial gut reaction was one of, you're right. This is the PTSD portion, the cycling that I would get into. See, look what I do to her. Look how much pain and suffering I bring into her life. I think the hardest part for me was that I got used to slacking it up, trying to pull myself up by my bootstraps. And I'll tell you what, I pulled myself up so hard by those bootstraps, I pulled those damn straps off, I'll tell you what. But if I could try to help you save yourself from a mistake that I made over and over and over again, sometimes the harder thing is getting the help that you need. And I couldn't do it on my own. I needed a lot of help. And I think this is where Warrior Care Network, in conjunction with Wounded Warrior Project, they helped me out so much. when I got help at home base and Road Home program. It was amazing. Like the therapists that they were able to pick out for us with that couple's counselor that we were able to see, they helped us out so much, and that kind of started me on the journey of even more therapy in a different way. That's where I was able to, I guess, really kind of make therapy my full-time job. It's almost as if all these infected wounds inside of myself, the ones I couldn't necessarily open myself up and share and show to other people, they needed to be cleaned out. That required a lot of rigorous action on my part, a lot of pain, and opening up and vulnerability and sharing those things. There was a turning point that I was able to clearly recognize within myself that all of the work that I had been doing was worth it. And it was one night when I was sitting down on the couch with my wife and our dog. They were asleep, on top of me. And I was able to look at them and take them in for who they were and what was right in front of me. There was a sense of peace and contentment. The anxiety didn't come in. The guilt didn't come in. The dead Iraqi policeman's face, he didn't even show up. And I was able to smile and be happy. Before, it would trigger 100% of the time guilt. I couldn't help but think that I wasn't deserving of that love, that it was better meant for someone else. But because of therapy, because of my acceptance of what it is that I live with, I'm able to take that in. To be able to drink from that cup and to kind of bask in that warmth. That's what makes this worth it. That's what makes all the heartache and the time and the trouble worth it.
You heard Sergio mention the Wounded Warriors Project. Jay Struberg of Newsy's Morning Rush interviewed the project's Chief Program Officer, Jennifer Silva.
1 in 5 vets report they have experienced barriers to mental health care. Some of the most common barriers: wanting to solve the issue on their own and fears of being perceived as weak. What can be done to provide more awareness on where to seek help?
I think what can be done is really warriors talking about their issues directly. The more that peers can help other peers get into care, the less that they feel that it's weak to do that. We really have to have a national conversation. Much like other Americans, warriors and the warriors that we serve do face anxiety and depression along with their post-traumatic stress. It's a human problem, not just a veteran problem, and we have to be able to talk about it and talk about our own struggles so it's easier to access care.
That fears of being perceived as weak really stands out to me. Can you really talk about that and how vets are dealing with that aspect in particular?
Sure. I mean, when you think about what active duty service members do, they train they're put in very difficult positions in situations, and they really are very resilient, very gritty. But I think they're put into an abnormal situation, whether it's combat or deployment, being away from your family for over a year. And so the human body's going to have an abnormal reaction to that. So I think the more that we normalize that, it doesn't have to be that you're broken. It's that you just have some obstacles and you have to work on it. And so the more that warriors talk about it, the more that it normalizes the conversation and doesn't seem weak. And once you take that first step, it's really important, that first step, and it can be very difficult. But once you get into high quality care, it can be really life-changing.
Our thanks to Jay and the Morning Rush team for sharing that interview with us. Ahead, we turn our attention to Buffalo to explore the everyday experience of Black Americans, and later, solutions that are already saving lives. This is America's Breakdown, confronting our mental health crisis. You're watching America's Breakdown, Confronting Our Mental Health Crisis. I'm Amber Strong. This past May, a white supremacist on a mission to murder targeted a grocery store in a predominantly black neighborhood in Buffalo, New York, killing 10 people, stunning the community and the country. And it came at an already difficult time for black Americans. The wounds in Buffalo are still raw today, as I found out during a recent trip.
You said you wanted to see my day.
Dr. Kenyani Davis is making her rounds here at the Community Health Center in Buffalo, New York.
PTSD training. Yeah. Did you guys get my email?
Yes.
You're gonna be there?
Yes.
After a mass shooter murdered 10 members of the neighborhood she serves, she's still trying to process it all.
It's the community that got affected, especially when you're talking about a hate crime. It was every emotion at once.
She says in the days that followed, her team got to work, something they've always done.
If they needed us in a medical component, we were there. If they needed us as community leaders, we were there. If they needed us as friends, if they needed us just to create an open space, we were there.
Across the city, other organizations recognize the need for mental health services too.
We were in the crowd with the community in front of TOPS, praying, crying, just being there, an ear for them to express themselves.
When it came to treatment, psychiatric nurse practitioner Melissa Archer noticed people on the city's east side, made up of mostly black residents, were hesitant to seek help.
People want to see people that look like them so that they don't have to explain certain things.
According to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, only 1 in 3 black adults with mental illness receive treatment. The National Alliance on Mental Illness says that's mostly due to socioeconomic challenges, stigma surrounding mental illness, and mistrust of the medical industry. Black people are often victims of healthcare bias when those providing the treatment lack cultural awareness. For community leaders in Buffalo, that meant offering more counselors with shared experiences and cultures. Part of the healing process means meeting people where they are, and for some mental health care professionals, that meant setting up shop 2 miles from where the incident took place. The Urban League team says the numbers have increased since moving into the neighborhood and making more black counselors readily available, all thanks to temporary funding from FEMA through New York Project Hope. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, between the years 2000 and 2019, the number of racial/ethnic minorities within the psychologist workforce more than doubled, increasing 166%. However, researchers predict that increase will still be inadequate to meet the demands of minority patients. In the meantime, doctors here say they'll continue to stand in the gap for as long as possible.
There was no book. I didn't go to the Harrison's internal medicine book or any of the other, references to kind of figure out how do you navigate a community through this type of hurt and pain. How do I feel as a black woman in this community? What is the hurt and the pain that I feel from being victimized? That's what you bring to the table.
Most of the time, the reporting, as impactful as we try to make it, ends there. But not now, not with Newsy's commitment to exposing the daily realities of how mental health impacts lives all across the country. So let's go deeper in Buffalo with a mother who's also a pastor, leading her family and congregation on a path to healing.
My name is Reverend Denise Walden Glenn. I am 42 years old and I live in Buffalo, New York. I am blessed to have 13 children total, ranging from 26 years old to 13 years old. Part of what drew me to Buffalo is I have a son who is uniquely abled, and he gets the best health care here.
Breaking news out of Buffalo, New York, where authorities say at least 10 people are dead after a mass shooting at a supermarket.
I looked at my phone and saw my husband's photo. So I answered the phone and he told me, he said, something terrible is happening. And a lot of people are trying to call you. And I had missed, several calls. And so I called her and she said, you need to get to TOPS right now. There's a shooting happening out there. May 14th brought up a lot of questions for my children. I think it brought up a lot of questions for a lot of us. Right after it happened, in all honesty, I didn't know how to answer any of the questions. My kids wanted to know why. They wanted to understand how somebody so young could have so much hate. I think in the beginning, I didn't recognize how much so, but I found myself like any sudden movement, any out of the ordinary noises, I was flinching. I was just kind of jumpy. I'm definitely on edge. definitely more aware of my surroundings and watching who's around me when I'm in spaces like stores or community spaces. My family and I have safety plans all the time. We've gotten very good at looking for all the exits when we're in places. Like, this has now become our norm. Returning to church was difficult. My very first time going back to church after the shooting, I went in and I was sitting in the back of the church, and I saw the ushers bringing in a white gentleman that I had never, he's never been to our church before. And I remember I couldn't focus on service. I can't tell you what was preached about that day. All I could do was watch this person. Even once I knew security knew they were there, is watch them. And I was terrified for myself, my own kids, and it made me feel very helpless. But my faith is what grounds me. My faith is what keeps me. I will be honest, I definitely struggled during the immediate time after May 14th, because like I said, it's hard to understand. It's hard to understand seeing that level of hate and violence show up. But because I have seen incredible things that God has done in my life and in the life of so many other people, and also it's given me the strength to really love on and support others. Mental health and wellness is something that I'm very passionate about. It means a lot to me. I am a practitioner and a trainer of restorative practices. And so that was something that very soon after the shooting, we were very aware, we needed to have that in place. So yes, my family is receiving mental health services, and not just necessarily what we see as traditional therapy, but a lot of non-traditional mental health services, like art therapy, music therapy, movement therapy, and things that, yes, it helps us learn to deal with our anxiety, our breathing, but also just gives us joy. My kids come alongside me in this work, and not just because it's mom's work, but because they believe in it. And so my hopes and dreams for my children is I just want them to be able to be everything that they were divinely created to be. I want them to know that they have the ability to thrive. These are things I want for my children, but these are things that I want for all children, not just my children. It's okay, right? It's okay to struggle. It's okay to have the emotions that you have, but I also would want folks to not go through that alone. Reach out, put community around yourself, and find things like how I've found that putting up positivity all around me is helpful for me. Try things to find out what is helpful to you, what makes you smile. And there's nothing wrong with needing help and needing community and needing support. We as human beings were created that way. We are taught to be strong and resilient, and that we should have it within our own know-with-all to get through everything. But that is a myth. That is not true. We have to walk in our own liberation, our own freedom, which starts in our mind and in our heart, and realizing that we have the ability to be part of creating what we want to see in our communities and our lives. And I'm honored to walk in it every day.
Ahead, we expand the conversation with a spotlight on solutions, from the miracle of pellets to treat alcohol addiction to a new 3-digit number already saving lives. This is a Newsy special, America's Breakdown Confronting Our Mental Health Crisis. Thank you for sticking with Newsy as we present America's Breakdown Confronting Our Mental Health Crisis. I'm Amber Strong. This hour, we're spotlighting stories that are a priority for Newsy because they're a priority in lives like yours. The truth is, stories of mental health are difficult to tell, but that is our mission here. And the next topic is a tough one: suicide. In a moment, we'll take you inside the new 3-digit hotline that's literally serving as a lifeline. But first, the heartbreaking story of Deb and Bob Sherwood, a powerhouse reporting couple with a life together cut short. In a moment, Chance Sill sits down with Deb, but first, her story from Jessica Maduker.
You never know what's going on behind somebody's persona.
Deb Sherwood was a former news anchor alongside her husband, Bob Sherwood.
You know, whether you're in news or not, but especially in news, because we're taught to, put on that brave face.
Her husband, Bob, passed away 11 years ago. He was an award-winning reporter at TMJ4 in the 70s.
At the Miller Brewing Company, Bob Sherwood, News 4.
Well, I had an amazing marriage. I was married for over 31 years to the same man, but unfortunately he had some medical issues that came up that were not going to get better, and he eventually decided to take his own life. In my particular case, I had absolutely no clue that's where his mind was. So it's sort of like, what did I miss? What could I have said differently? What should I have said differently?
Deb has been working with Mental Health America to spread awareness.
There are things that happen to all of us, financial problems, marital issues, a loss of a loved one, health concerns that, we don't necessarily share with people in general. And being on the air, you share probably even less than most people do, simply because it's so personal.
She hopes her step of vulnerability and sharing her experience will make a difference.
Be willing to admit you don't know it all. Be willing to admit that sometimes we need help. It doesn't have to be help forever, but if you're going through a particularly rough spot, why not reach out and get the assistance of somebody who's trained to help with that kind of a thing.
I'm Jessica Maduker for Newsy.
Deb Sherwood joins us tonight from the WTMJ newsroom where her husband Bob once worked as a reporter. Deb, thank you for coming on today, especially because this would have been you and Bob's 42nd wedding anniversary, right?
That's correct. It's an emotional day for me, but I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. In so many families we know, after a suicide, grief and stigma, they form this kind of like double helix. And deconstructing that is so hard. So when you decided, I'm going to talk about this, not only privately, but publicly, Bob's death, what was your intention? What was your process?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because when it first happened and I started reaching out to family and a few close friends, everyone told me, you cannot tell anybody how Bob died because you'll ruin his professional reputation. And I thought, okay, that makes sense to me. And I don't want anybody's last memory of Bob to be suicide, as opposed to stories that he did and people that he spoke with, that kind of a thing. So I kept it a secret, other than like medical professionals, for like a year. And then I finally went, you know what, I'm not going to heal until I start telling the story. And for me, it was sort of like, we spend our careers telling other people's stories, so it's time to start telling our own in hopes that it helps.
Absolutely. And part of it is the story we tell ourselves and how we make sense of it. Like you said, by trade, you and Bob were storytellers. In some ways, you feel like Bob was trying to protect you, is my understanding.
Absolutely. He was really, really sick and was not going to get better. And I think he just did not want me to spend my years taking care of him, because he really needed my help at that point with virtually everything. And watching our bank account dwindle. So I believe that's the reason why he made the decision that he did.
Deb, the grieving process, it happens mostly behind closed doors. You know, it's an inside job, and we know it's different for everyone. For you, I was reading your story, and for you, something like your mattress became difficult to deal with. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, it sounds like such a trivial thing, but I mean, he's been passed away at that point like 10 years, and I really needed to change the mattress in the bedroom. But it was like, I don't want to let go of something that was so intimate. It was such a major part of our life. Sleeping together and, talking together in bed and, other things that obviously happen in your bedroom. So it was a really difficult thing for me to essentially let go of that and be willing to move on from that. But it really was hard.
It's shocking to hear someone who exuded strength and command, because I hear he was a Bulldog reporter, someone who exudes affection has suddenly taken their life. What has the response been as you've been opening up? Because it's not always, when we open ourselves up, it's not always pretty what comes back. You know, sometimes it is and sometimes it's not.
Yeah, Chance, I tell you, it was all over the place. I mean, I had people say things like, well, so much for the life insurance. Other people saying, well, I guess your marriage wasn't as good as you thought it was, or he never would have left you this way. I had doctors say, you know, how could you not see it coming? Why do you still wear your wedding ring? And it was sort of like, how do you think that's going to help me? One therapist asked me in a group therapy session, and she knew full well what had happened. You know, she asked me, well, Deb, just how gory was it? And she knew that I had found him, that I had to clean up the scene after the police and first responders came. And it was just sort of like, maybe I shouldn't be talking about this. So it really makes you second guess yourself. It's a matter of finding the right people. And for me, it was a matter of determining that what maybe is common sense for somebody else maybe doesn't fit this scenario, at least as far as I'm concerned. So the comments have been very wonderful in some cases. You know, I'm so sorry, can I come over on Tuesday and help go through Bob's things? How can I help? And others were just not thinking, down to cruel.
Yeah. Some of those things, you just wonder what was going through their head. Probably nothing, and which is, we have to be intentional, which is why we're talking, of course. You mentioned, Deb, that people on TV, they're probably, everyone knows them, but they're less likely to be open. And I knew exactly what you meant, because you fear, okay, a split second of vulnerability or a less than perfect authenticity moment or something, it can puncture a whole career you've built on a certain image. So with that in mind, what do you think people need to know about suicide?
That it can happen to anyone, any family, at any time. Sometimes you have clues that something serious is wrong. In my case, I did not see it coming at all. I thought Bob and I could talk about everything. That's what we did for a living, right? But this is just something that he, I believe, really made on the spur of the moment. But it's sort of like, don't ask people all the details. You know, people will tell you what they're ready to tell you when they're ready to tell you, at least in my opinion. And I might tell one person more than I tell somebody else, just because of a relationship or how I'm feeling on that particular day. But one of the biggest things, Chance, for me is don't stop communicating with the people that are left behind. For me, it's almost 11 years, but it's sort of like, I still want to know that they were important to you as well. So, you know, keep up the phone calls, emails, whatever it is, and just let people know that you care about them.
Our thanks to Chance and the team at Newsy Tonight for sharing Deb's story with us. Now to a solution, a lifeline already proving to save lives. Clayton Sandell takes us inside the new 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline.
The calls here never stop.
Colorado Crisis Line, this is Austin.
At this mental health crisis call center in Denver.
That sounds pretty heavy.
Austin Wagner and fellow counselors are on the front lines in a battle to help people before they reach their breaking point.
It wouldn't be uncommon for me to hear that you might be having some thoughts of suicide, and so I wanted to check in and ask if that was something that you're dealing with today.
In more than 200 centers around the country.
So this is our main call center.
The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline helps people struggling with all kinds of crises.
Losing a loved one, going through a divorce, not having enough gas on the side of the road.
Last year alone, more than 2.5 million people called for help.
It's free, confidential, and available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Reaching the Lifeline always meant dialing or texting this 11-digit number. Now it's a lot shorter, 988. Since 988 went live in July, states around the country report calls for help are already way up. 988 is easy to remember, a mental health version of 911 that advocates say is critically needed to connect callers with mental health services.
When people dial 911, so often law enforcement is the response that people get. And frankly, that often results in trauma or tragedy even. And we really want an alternative to that.
The federal government spent $432 million to help pay for the 988 transition, but it's up to states to keep it running, and many are already struggling. Illinois fails to answer suicide lifeline calls about 80% of the time. Colorado and Texas miss about half, calls that must be routed to backup centers. A survey conducted by the RAND Corporation found many states lack long-term 988 funding and need more workers. At D.D. Hirsch Mental Health Services in Los Angeles, they've been busy beefing up staff and volunteers like Joey Bloomfield. He answers calls once a week.
She said, my daughter's trying to take her life right now.
It gets intense, but he says it's critical every call gets answered.
People just want to talk. They're lonely. They don't have someone they can talk to.
Bloomfield can relate. In his early 20s, he says he started suffering massive depression and barely functioned for 7 years.
One of the darkest days I had was I was supposed to attend a father-daughter dance for my daughter in elementary school, and I couldn't do it.
In 2016, he tried to end his life.
I realized when I got better that I needed to give back.
He now channels his struggle every time he answers a call. Helping others, he says, is helping him.
I had a call from a young woman who was struggling mightily, and we talked for quite a while, and at the end she said, "Can I do what you do?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Can I work the hotline?" And I said, "Of course." It was an amazing call.
That was Clayton Sandell reporting. A quick break, then we're back with what you may call a miracle pellet, helping people conquer alcohol addiction. This is a Newsy special, America's Breakdown, confronting our mental health crisis. Back now with the Newsy special, America's Breakdown, confronting our mental health crisis. If you've ever had anyone in your life who suffered from an alcohol addiction, you know the pain it causes loved ones and friends. But now an experimental pellet may be a critical tool in helping people on their path to victory. Lindsay Thies explains how it works.
You may know Jeremy Miller from the 80s family sitcom Growing Pains.
Those were always our photos. Those were always home photos.
Yeah.
It was the whole thing.
But it's the pains of addiction that he wants to share.
Even on the show, I never had it together.
Miller has a family medical history of alcohol use disorder on both sides. He began drinking at a very young age.
I mean, my grandparents were very traditional 70s functional alcoholics. 4.5 years old, I would go around my grandmother and grandfather's parties afterwards and finish off all the beers.
He didn't touch alcohol again until age 12, binge drinking during the later seasons of the show. As Miller grew up on camera, the alcohol habit worsened.
Not every episode, not every day, nothing like that, but I was sneaking a bottle occasionally. My brain chemistry hadn't changed to that point yet. It wasn't until after I got back from the second reunion, which was filmed in New Orleans. During Mardi Gras, I woke up one day and realized that I absolutely, unequivocally needed a drink.
He was missing important family events, drinking and blacking out. At one point, he nearly drowned while drunk.
There was no future. It didn't exist.
The future, now his present. 11 days sober with a 1-day relapse. That relapse propelled him to try a treatment he says saved his life. An experimental naltrexone implant.
It's the size of a couple of aspirin.
Patients must go through a minimal surgery. A doctor makes a small incision, inserts pellets on each side of the abdomen, and closes it with a couple of stitches. The implants slowly release naltrexone and dissolve away.
Nausea and headache are typically the two most common side effects that our patients come across, and typically those side effects dissipate over time.
This is how naltrexone works. Inside our brain, we have nerves. Their endings have different receptors that receive chemical messages from neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are linked to feelings like happiness, focus, reward, and motivation. In an addicted patient's brain, substances overload the receptors. It's too much of those reward feelings. On repeat, the brain starts to crave it. Naltrexone fills the slot of the receptor for both opiates and alcohol, but it does not activate it. No big reward feelings, the craving isn't there.
Another way to think about it, you can take the game of baseball, more specifically a baseball glove. A player catches the baseball in that glove and it sits there and no other baseballs can get into that glove. But at the same time, you can't do anything else with it. The effect of naltrexone in the brain is essentially the same here.
I kept waiting for that craving to return, for that want and need, and it never did.
Mental health experts say overcoming cravings are crucial for the more than 20 million Americans with substance use disorder. They can last for months. The latest data from 2019 shows 9% of those in recovery say they used medication as part of their treatment. Naltrexone itself is already FDA approved, but not as an implant. Patients currently have two options: a shot that works for 30 days or a daily oral pill. Research has found implants like the one Miller got last months longer and are more effective at preventing a relapse. So the race is on to make a long-lasting implant and get it FDA approved. If all goes well, one could be greenlit by 2024.
It's a fascinating story from Lindsay, giving new hope to people everywhere, and we'll be tracking the progress through more trials. Up next on this Newsy special, we turn our focus to our kids. Are they all right? Right now in New Orleans, there's a quiet crisis that you can't avoid. Most children, 60% of them, are living with PTSD. They're 5 times more likely to show signs of serious emotional disturbance than the average American kid. Tammy Eswick explains what's happening there.
They're the symptoms of time spent in war zones. For those with PTSD, nightmares, angry outbursts, suicidal thoughts, and flashbacks give its victims no peace. But now the symptoms are being experienced by school-aged children in urban Louisiana. According to a study by the Institute of Women and Ethnic Studies, 60% of children in New Orleans experience PTSD. That's a rate that's 4 times the national average. So how did the Big Easy, a city known for fun, jazz, and Mardi Gras, create an environment similar to a war zone? Naya Cordier and her husband, Jason Jackson, say for their family, it all began with Hurricane Katrina, one of the largest and most destructive storms in U.S. history, killing over 1,800 and leaving behind $125 billion in damage.
Katrina was a catastrophic event. It traumatized my entire family because they were one of the families that got left behind here.
Cordier says her then 10-year-old son, Will, saw things no child should experience.
My own son got to see dead bodies, people being shot, people being shoved to the ground, harmed, hurt, fighting over buses, fighting over food, fighting over, the little bit that was being looted, waiting for days for someone to come, and he was 10. What did they expect that would do to all of these kids?
After Katrina came another trauma, gun violence.
I've seen my neighbor or this stranger be murdered in the yard. I see the blood. That's traumatic. I am a conqueror. I am free.
Samuel Chesterfield is a longtime licensed professional counselor who's helped school-aged children through PTSD. He says it's common for children living in urban areas like New Orleans to experience PTSD.
Natural disasters, traumatic event, abuse, and that's both physical, emotional, trauma, a death of a loved one. That could be a chronic illness, that's cancer, a traumatic event, a car wreck, violence. All of those things play a major, major role, and especially when you live in an inner city.
With the support of family, Will graduated from high school and made it to college, but a decision to return home for the summer sent his life into a tailspin.
He's playing ball one night, and the guy pulls out a gun and starts shooting. And those few little words changed my life. My guy shot. The events of what happened when my son got shot were like a domino effect for us.
After the shooting, Cordier says her son turned into a completely different person, changing his name, carrying guns, and dropping out of college. The shooting left his family in shock and triggered PTSD in his younger sister, Jace Jackson. We're not showing her face to protect her privacy.
I'm scared. It's like a thought, okay, if I make eye contact with the wrong person and I hold it for a little too long, something bad might happen.
Jace now refuses to go through that neighborhood of New Orleans where her big brother nearly lost his life.
It makes me like really nervous and like it makes me kind of antsy, if I'm being honest. It's like an unsettling feeling.
Summer months in New Orleans not only bring heat, but also violence. In 2022, New Orleans topped the list of cities with the highest increase of homicide rates. This according to Wallet Hub. Mental health experts say it's due to the lack of activities, internships, and jobs for teens. The Center for Resilience was born out of a desperate need to help children in the city. For the last 8 years, Executive Director Elizabeth Marcel Williams has been a provider.
Over a period of time, in the years after Hurricane Katrina, we saw a gradual shutdown of state-run programming for children and adolescents with mental health needs. Around, call it 2012 or so, schools in the city began articulating a need and saying, we have kids in our buildings right now who are crying out for more intensive support than we're equipped to be able to provide. And it's manifesting in aggressive behaviors and property destruction, in children not being able to learn.
They are now the city's only therapeutic day program, shining a light to help kids to find their way out of darkness. The nonprofit provides counseling and enough academics to help students graduate.
So on average, when we look at our success rate, 83% of the kids who have come through our program and gone back to their homeschool have been successful in that homeschool.
Cordier says such a program might have helped her family. Instead, she and her husband moved to the suburbs of New Orleans for protection of their mental health and peace.
Tammy Eswick, Newsy.
Our final break of the hour, then we're back with some tips for your own life. This hour, we've exposed the difficult and painful mental health reality facing us across the country, but we've also explored some solutions. We have even more solutions for you on our website at newsy.com/mental health. I'm Amber Strong. Thank you for joining us for this special hour as Newsy makes it a priority to bring you the nuance of how this crisis is impacting American lives.